enlighten us on how to bring all these data together and make sense of them.
Oh, thank you, Lori. So I'm going to talk about triangulation. And when triangulation was first introduced in research and evaluation, it was translated from the methods of land surveying, different kinds of survey, with the metaphor that the best, truest picture of a situation would come by looking at it from many different angles. And that doing so would let the views sort of cancel out the blind spots or the flaws of each other. In practice, we know that what we see with one data source doesn't always point to the same thing as the other data sources. In fact, that whole metaphor for land surveying is a nice idea, but it doesn't really fit with the world of research and evaluation. Still, we design our work to include triangulation, that is, collecting data from multiple avenues, because it gives us a much richer picture of the outcomes, and it protects us from jumping to conclusions too quickly. Typically, one of three things can happen when we try to line up our different data sources. The first possibility is akin to the land surveying metaphor. This is convergence, when the results from different data sources all line up nicely and agree to get along. And while this example shows triangulation with two different methods, one could also design triangulation among different informant groups, like teachers and business advisors, or even different researchers. Anyway, when we see convergence, it looks like clearly supported evidence for your program's outcomes. This is super tidy, and you may be tempted to pat yourself on the back and submit your report. But our PI, Arlen Gullickson, reminded me that when one sees this situation, it's time to be slightly suspicious of bias. Are we sure we didn't double dip here? Because if the focus group students also took the survey, there's a chance that the two seemingly different data sources are actually just duplicates. No wonder they converge, right? Best to check that out. The second thing that could happen when you try to triangulate is that you get inconsistent data. In this situation, your sources don't perfectly line up, but they're pretty close. Maybe the survey showed that job readiness needs were met, and the focus group showed that students thought the greatest benefit was that their technology needs were met. This is slightly inconsistent, but still validating of the project's goals in a complementary way. The two findings are close enough that you can say, yes, student needs were met in the areas of job readiness, and the focus group also revealed that technology was an important need met by the program, something like that. It's a quite common outcome in evaluation, and certainly many an evaluator has survived. The third possibility, having entirely contradictory findings, is what can be terrifying, at least at first. In this situation, a survey might show that the program made significant impacts on students, while the focus group showed no impacts at all, or even negative impacts. Well, at least one wise evaluator has reminded us that these situations are very helpful for reducing inappropriate certainty. We wouldn't want to be too sure of ourselves, right? I know what you're saying. That's all well and good, but what do I do with data like that? There are some things that you should do that can help you figure out what to write about contradictory data. First, relax. This is what data looks like, and this is why you design triangulation in the first place, so that you have multiple viewpoints and a lot of explanatory power. And explain is exactly what you're going to do. It's not easy, but contradictory data is a good situation to be in because you have a lot to work with. Second, as you should with the other two possibilities in trying to triangulate, check your work. Perhaps your evaluation intern accidentally tainted the focus group by talking about the survey results in his introduction, thereby biasing the data. Maybe you made data entry errors. Review your data first to be sure the contradiction you found isn't your own doing. Pending a successful review of your data, you should next begin examining the background characteristics. And when I say that, I mean you should start grouping or disaggregating your data to investigate whether the findings are different for certain groups of your students. Who exactly was in the focus group, and how does that match up with the sample for the survey? If there are slightly different groups, you might be able to use that to explain some of your discrepancies. Perhaps the focus group only included males, for example, or only new students who mistakenly thought their participation would lead to extra credit. Perhaps the two sources of data were collected at different times in the semester. Often differences in characteristics can help explain at least part of the contradiction. Next, and even if you found interesting characteristics in the last step, you should talk about the findings with lots of different people. Your evaluation team, your client team, maybe even your project's advisory board, or the students who were in your sample. Seek out their interpretations. And if none of the earlier steps have been prosperous, this is also a good time to ask for opinions about weighting different sources of data. weighting them. For example, if your focus group students told you they look at your web page daily, but your website analytics don't bear that out, you might give your website data more weight and assume the focus group students were trying to please their professor. Or maybe your IT person isn't very good, and so you would actually go with what your focus group students say. Ask around for opinions about the relative perceived weight of your sources, which could help resolve or explain the contradiction. After you've taken the previous 4 steps, you're quite likely in a good place to start drawing conclusions. Perhaps you found that the students interpreted one of your survey questions in a way that was not what you intended, so your survey findings don't match what your focus group reported. Perhaps you found that the survey showed your project met its goals, but the focus group participants pointed out a handful of bonus, unexpected outcomes that they saw as more important. That's the power of contradictory findings to help explain the outcomes of your project. In most circumstances, you'll be able to develop multiple plausible